Hello everyone, welcome to Pop Customs 101. In this first episode we're going to discuss all of the basic things that you need to do a pop custom. To start you out, obviously, you're going to need a pop. So what you're going to need to decide on is if you're going to go the DIY route, which is a blank pop, or an already existing pop. Both methods are very capable of doing, very easy to do. And throughout this tutorial series and classes, hopefully by the time you're done, you'll be able to do your own. So the first things I'd like to discuss is, what are you planning on making? That determines what style of pop you're going to use. If you want to get into sculpting your own stuff, whether it's all the details, mix of sculpt and paint, you may want to go with a DIY pop. If you are looking to make something in, say, like the custom action figure style, where you're basically Frankensteining pieces from different pops, you may want to get a couple of different pops and decide on what you're going to do. Now, as far as what you're going to make and what I'm going to show you what I'm going to be making, all of the techniques apply all across the board. So you're not going to have to worry about, well, hey, will this work with one or will this work with the other? It applies to both. So whatever I explain to you guys in these classes applies to both methods. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about the pops because obviously you're here for that reason. So, okay. Next thing I want to talk about is paints. Paints can be found at any hobby store. You're going to want to get acrylic paint, not enamel. You want acrylic. They make acrylic in several different types. Now I use a flat matte acrylic. They make a satin acrylic and a gloss acrylic. So depending on what style of look you want and how you want your paint to look will determine what paint you buy, but always make sure to buy acrylic. You can find acrylic paint almost in every single chain store, hobby store, art store. They all carry acrylic paints. And there's really no difference between the paints aside from price. Quality, I've noticed, isn't really that much different. Okay, paints are out of the way. Oop, except for knocking them down. Okay, the next thing, obviously, is brushes or an airbrush. Now, if you decide to go the airbrush route, I'll have links in the description on where I buy my equipment from. All of my equipment I buy from Harbor Freight. I'm a big fan of these Central Pneumatic siphon feed airbrushes. They're 20 bucks. So for a beginner, you can get the entire kit for $100, which includes an airbrush and your compressor to get started. If you go that route, it's pretty reasonable expense, but it's going to last you a long time. So it's a really long-term expense. Again, these are only $20 if you buy them just outright, so if it breaks on you, you're not out a couple $100. So if you're new to airbrushing, this is the best way to go. I'll have some other links in the description as well of other companies and other places that have similar models for the same price. Obviously, you're going to need glue. Now, when doing reassembly on these, you have to have a way to get them to stay back together. I prefer to use super glue. There are some people that use two-part epoxy. I find super glue is the easiest route and it stays just as strong. The other thing you might want to look into is obviously brushes, which you can find at your hobby store. Very basic brush packs are available for very cheap. And I like to use girls' nail files for any like hard sanding or rough sanding or even just scuffing certain areas where paint won't stick. And just if you have little paint issues, say a drip or something, you can sand them off and paint right over them and you don't have any issues. Excuse me. Next thing is brush cleaning. I use rubbing alcohol for my brush cleaning. I use that in part with hot water. I also use that for rinsing in between colors when using my airbrush. And that will save you some time as far as getting your stuff clean, especially if you're using an airbrush. This mostly applies to airbrush people. Rubbing alcohol and hot water, 50-50 blend. is a great in-between rinse for when you're going from color to color in your airbrush. Saves you time so you're not having to jump and clean every single time you switch between colors. Okay, next thing is, we're actually not going to go over this. You are going to need some dish detergent in the next part of this class. Part 2 is all cleaning and disassembly. So be ready to have some dish detergent ready as we go through that. I'm also going to discuss the boil and pop method for disassembly, so you may need a little pot pan for on your stove, and I'll go more into that in part 2. Other thing is for week 4, if you're going to follow along with week 4, which is the sculpting class, you are going to need to pick up some materials to do some sculpting with. I use Super Sculpey. And for this tutorial, I'm going to be using Super Sculpey, but if you have heard, you can use a 2-part epoxy for doing the same thing. They make a 2-part compound epoxy called Epoxy Sculpt that you can buy that works pretty much the same way outside of that you don't have to bake it. This stuff you have to bake, which I am going to go over. But for the sculpting tutorial, I'll be using Super Sculpey. So if you want to follow along for that and learn anything from that, you're going to want to get yourself some Super Sculpey. Okay, now we've got that out of the way. Sealer. I use matte clear coat. Okay, this is a matte finish. This doesn't have a glossy shine to it. It does have a shine to it, but it's not super glossy where it, it causes a glare or anything like that. I don't recommend using gloss clear coat because it doesn't dry completely. This stuff dries in seconds, and you're sealed, you're good to go. Krylon, matte finish. Okay, some possible tools that you are going to need. One may be a Dremel. You might find times where you have to Dremel out certain areas, or even, for instance, I also have a power drill here. You might come across a time where you are going to need a power drill. This comes when you, say, have arms that you've taken off of a body and they won't go back in. You might have to widen out the holes a little bit to get the arms to fit back in and set back in properly. I'm going to go over that as I do things in each tutorial. I just want to get you guys familiarized with what tools I use on a common basis. Okay. Now, the other thing you may want to get is a cutting work mat. If you have a working table, this will save you as far as like doing your clay, from getting your clay on your table or your epoxy sculpt actually on your work surface. Now, the other thing is a rolling pin. You probably have one of these in one of your drawers in your kitchen. You're probably going to want one that's separated away from those, even if you buy one. These aren't that expensive. I've had this one for years, and I think I paid a total of $4 for it. This will work great for when you have to roll out your clay or thin down your clay for specific areas like making a jacket or detailed areas. So rolling pin's going to come in handy. And last but not least, skin tone Pantones. Now, I will try to get scans of these up, or at least a Pantone up with the video once it's posted. These skin tone Pantones will help you out and save you a ton of time if you have to mix your own skin tones. I'll be going over that in the painting, but I want to get you guys familiarized with the fact that you may want to have a picture of a skin tone set right with you when you're mixing your paints for skin tones. Okay. Next is Sculpting Tools. They make a variety of different tools for sculpting, both metal and wood. This one is actually paper. You also may want to get yourself an X-Acto knife in case you have to cut certain areas away. I'll go over more of the sculpting tools during the sculpting tutorial in week 4. Like I said, this is just to basically familiarize you with the common tools that I use on an everyday basis and give you a general idea of what you need to get started. Okay, get these out of the way. Next is we're going to talk about airbrushes and spray booths. Now, I haven't shown you guys my spray booth yet. That'll come in the painting tutorial, and I'll explain more about how that all works. As far as your airbrush, there's really not much to these. These are a 2-trigger setup, so you press down for air, pull back for paint. And these are siphon feed, so it draws the paint from the bottom. You can also get a gravity feed, which has the cup on the top, and it drops down in. It's all personal preference. I'll go over more of that in the painting tutorial, but a lot of what you're going to see me painting is going to be done with an airbrush versus hand painting. Okay, everyone, that's it for part 1. I'll be back with part 2, and thank you for watching. And there goes the rolling pin falling off my table. I appreciate your support on Patreon. I actually have 2 shout-outs that I'll be doing in the next episode. Your support is greatly appreciated because the more support I have from you guys, the more I can do more of these tutorials on not only just pop customization, but models, toy making. My initial goal on Patreon is to reach a $500 goal so I can afford to put that money towards getting my first 3D printer, so I can start bringing you guys 3D print tutorials on more actual custom toy making versus taking actual toys and customizing them. I'd like to be able to bring you guys a multitude of different classes involving specifically just toy customization in general. So I hope you've enjoyed this first episode, and I definitely thank you and appreciate your support. And if you haven't signed up for my classes, get up on my Patreon and do so. I'll have links in the bottom, and thank you and have a good day.